The length of the sales cycle in financial services is legendary. Slow decisions, endless diligence, constant risk reviews. It's practically an industry meme. And to be fair, the stakes are real. When money moves, it has to arrive. When deposits sit in a bank, they have to be safe. When insurance is sold, it has to work. But somewhere along the way, caution turned into paralysis. What often gets labeled as risk management is really an aversion to decision-making itself. Banks ask more questions, add more steps, delay commitment, often increasing the risk by avoiding learning, accountability, and real-world feedback. That's what this episode is about. Today, Lindsay Borgeson from Bank and Kalyani Ramadurgam from portfolio company Kobalt Labs walk through their partnership and how it came together faster than most people would expect, and what actually smoothed the decision process, what didn't matter as much as people assume, and how they managed success after the decision is made. One of my favorite parts of being part of Alloy Labs and co-hosting this show, I have a ringside seat to the inner workings of banks, startups, and where they intersect. This conversation cuts through mythology and offers practical advice for all sorts of organizations to make decisions that drive results, and the partners trying to sell into them. How do they set themselves up for success? Next on Breaking Banks, decisions are greater than diligence. It's almost a joke, a misnomer, like a cultural touchstone when we talk about banks are slow, right? Like glacial pace. And I've even heard some jokes that, we make glaciers look fast sometimes with decision-making within financial services. Part of that for good reason. People trust us with their money, and they expect when you send money or do things that is going to be compliant, it will show up on the other side, all of this. Yet, they're moving ever faster. And when I look at, and I have the benefit of knowing both of you exceedingly well, that Core and Kobalt were able to move forward in a partnership, I don't want to say is record time, right? Like Usain Bolt's not, going to come vying for a gold medal, and hand it over to you guys and just say, you're the new fastest in the world. But I'd love to start with, Kalyani, why don't we start with you? Let's tell the story of what came from a backdrop here about how the partnership came together. How'd you guys identify, Bank and who to engage with there from the startup's perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've been getting to know a couple of folks at Core over a period of time, like through the money 2020s of the world. We had just started to become familiar with each other. Kobalt works with a lot of partner banks, and so we always have a running list of, dream banks that we want to meet and work with, and Core was on that list for a while. And so I think especially ones that have a reputation for being open to innovation are ones that, interestingly, we know might be more likely to move faster once they know that they want something. And so we knew Core had that reputation, and we knew that we would have been excited to work with them. And so we kind of got to know them over time. I think what was interesting is that when we first met them, it wasn't necessarily the right point to pull the trigger. But we got to know each other, and we had them test the platform and validate that it worked really well for them. And then the status was, once they're ready to bring us in, we can just pull the trigger really quickly, which is how it all kind of came together.
Well, I want to come back to that because the discipline to not push things is a rarity. But I want to come back to that. Lindsay, from your perspective, one's got to feel good to say you've got a reputation for having as a superpower. It's like the bank that they want to work with. Is that something Core's intentionally cultivated to be a superpower, or is that a byproduct of something else?
I'd love to say it was super intentional, but I think it's more about being purposeful in what our mission is and what outcomes we want. So I think that we're pretty clear about when we're ready to buy and when we have a problem we need to solve. I think that goes a long way for your reputation, and not saying, let me have 100 demos with you and then I'm still going to kick this around, right? I think that we go into things pretty intentionally as far as the problems that we need to solve. So that's helpful, and it helps us make better decisions, but I'm not sure we aimed to have a superpower.
Well, that's interesting, because that was going to be one of the points I make, where we see banks do the best and get out of that, call it the vicious cycle, chasing their tail of endless demos, is when they understand the problem to solve, right? Like it's that adage of like, if you have a bunch of people blindfolded feeling the elephant, they all feel a different part, so they describe it differently, right? Because you have the different parts, you're all trying to solve a different problem. How do you get clarity internally at Core around the problem to be solved? Is there an actual process to that? Is there documentation? Like, what happens to bring this clarity to life?
Yeah. I think like a lot of folks, we have a really nice process, right? Let's list our requirements. Let's understand this. Let's know our due diligence. And that's all really helpful and it's really important. But at some point, it's just like, solve the problem. You're living it. So early on in partner banking build, we were swimming in the sea of reg tech. And okay, I'd love to find one that does all the things, but I don't even know all the things I need at this juncture. So a platform like Kobalt, it came to be because we're living it now. We've operationalized it. I don't need maybe a platform that's going to solve everything for me right now, but I know that the problem I want to solve, and it has to do with internal pain points and then partner experience. So it was pretty easy to identify that. I think at times we really overcomplicate when we're going out in buy mode. We were just living a problem that we needed to solve.
So when you went out with looking for this, you didn't have a laundry list of SOC 2 must integrate to this, operate in real time, Azure versus AWS environment, like the things that you find in an RFP?
I mean, I'm sure Kalyani may have lived through some of that with our internal folks, but ultimately from the business side of things, it was as simple as we need to deliver at speed and scale, and we can't hire 500 people to read documents. It's a pretty simple process, right? And I'm not going to get stuck in a huge, I think the JP coins like the ROI loop, it's there, it's evident, and we just need to go. And I think making this decision sooner before you continue to perpetuate a problem is better. If we took a long time on this path and then trying to go backwards and integrate that would have created a larger issue than the slow decision making.
Yeah, I think that's also what, from our perspective, was able to make everything happen in such a crisp way. Because I remember Suzanne said, okay, we want to start, executing on our roadmap in the beginning of 2026. And we need to bring in Kobalt before that happens, because otherwise we'll have to hire people. It'll all happen more slowly. So she was smart about saying, implement Kobalt so that everything after that can happen really quickly. And then that's how also the urgency was able to be kind of justified really well.
So a little bit of the move slow to move quick.
Yeah, a little bit. We kind of just waited because I think, oh, sorry, Lindsay, I spoke over you. I think I remember the team had just said to me, we know we need to implement Kobalt right before we need to kick off all these things. We can confirm this is going to solve the problem. So just wait until we're ready. And then once they were ready, it all just kind of came together.
It didn't create kind of this constant back and forth, and that probably get annoying for both sides, right?
Exactly.
We did the proof of concept. This is going to work. We think that this is going to be the trigger point, and we picked up the phone and we said, now's the time. And that was a shout out that I should give to our chief risk officer. So that's part of the decision making too, is having the key stakeholders, right? We had the business purpose and the risk side that was really bought in. So leadership alignment went a long way.
Yeah, well, she emailed me and said, send the contract. I said, let's do it.
I love this. So given that Kobalt plays in the risk space, was the chief risk officer analyzing from the risk to the bank, or is a user of the system? Like, what hat was the chief risk officer wearing at that point, or both?
Well, she always wears all the hats. We're pretty fortunate in that area. So yes, it was all of it, right? She's very keened into the business and driving the revenue and understanding how this is going to play a part, but it's also from her natural role to protect the bank.
Yeah. So let's talk about the proof of concept for a second. Lindsay, was it the bank that decided they needed the proof of concept, and who helped decide what went into the proof of concept? Can you say what the ultimate goal of the proof was?
I think it was Kalyani that offered it up, frankly, so she might be able to speak to it, but it was awesome because I think banks, sometimes the reasons they're slow is you feel like you've been sold a bill of goods sometimes, like great bills teams, and I see the demo, but is that really how it functions when I get in there? And so I think, to Kalyani's credit, it was, we can do this, and ingested, I believe, one of our own policies and kind of pulled out some things that said, hey, this might need to be, refined. And so it was right there, and you couldn't argue the capability.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how, that's like the Cobalt style, I guess, of implementing and pitching value to banks, which is there's, of course, so many people. I can say anything, right? And I can pitch anything and say that we're going to solve the world for you and be flawless. And I think the way that you actually build trust is my whole philosophy with selling and implementing Cobalt is let somebody feel the value themselves so that that speaks for itself. I don't need to keep telling you if it's good, like you test it out on your own data. And if you see the value, then, I just try to let it speak for itself. And so with every implementation we do, typically after we do a demo and establish that there's some problem to solve, I always just offer to test it out, which is what happened.
And did the proof of concept, Kalyani, you had mentioned that, you didn't try and force the sales process. Where did the proof of concept, lay out what the sales process looked like? And I'll call it the, entrepreneurial maturity to say you can't jam this sale. Where did the proof of concept come in that process?
Yeah, it's funny because typically people try to push a proof of concept right when the timing is right to buy. But I actually think that the point of the proof of concept is let's see if this is actually something you should pursue. Let's see if that's actually going to work for you. And then if it is, we can move forward and figure out what does everything look like after that. So I actually think those should be done as early as possible. And so basically after a demo, the demo is the opportunity for my team to understand the problem that the bank had and for them to start to piece together how Cobalt might be able to help. But I think the folks we deploy technology with really start to understand how Cobalt will help once they try it. And so the proof of concept was really for them to understand when will the right time be because they felt the platform.
That's really interesting. Lindsay, is this different than other opportunities you've looked at where the proof of concept fits in how it's used in your process, whether or not that's at core or otherwise? Did it feel different in how the proof of concept worked here?
Yeah, I think we have our scars from not pushing for more proofs of concept or let us in your sandbox and things like that. So we've really pushed for things like that now. I do think that this was different in how early on it was done. And I think it's a big advantage for both sides because the minute we saw that, we said, okay, we know the problem we're going to face in partner banking, this will solve. Then we had all this time to start thinking about, but we could also use it here and here and here. And you had more people start talking about it. So when the time came to pull the trigger, everybody was on board. And we're not trying to implement it to solve all 6 of those things right now. We're still doing it with the original intent. But this was extremely helpful based on when it was provided to get a lot of that critical mass behind the go decision.
Hey, let's take a quick pause here because I want to tell you about a conference I actually like. If you've ever gone to a fintech event, worked the room and left thinking, I met a lot of people, but nothing really moved, you know the problem. Fintech Meetup is different. It's designed around outcomes, not wandering the expo floor. And that fits us well, and that's why we appreciate their support of the show. Last year, people booked more than 50,000 double opt-in meetings. And that matters because it means you're not guessing who to talk to. You're sitting down with buyers, partners, and decision makers you actually want in the room. That's also why Jason is spending time there this year. He'll be leading a very real, very grounded conversation on AI, no hype, no futuristic nonsense, just what's actually showing up inside financial institutions and what leaders should be paying attention to right now. So if you're already thinking about your 2026 calendar, tickets are already on sale, and you can save if you register before March 6th. Just search FinTech Meetup and check it out.
Now, I'll be honest, we see a lot of poorly executed proofs of concept. And one of the things I'd say that makes them poor proofs of concept is they go and prove something, but it actually isn't moving the decision forward, right? They're proving something, but it actually doesn't help the decision. Let me give us an example. We had worked with a bank in our very early days where the proof of concept was simply, could you get Fiserv data out of Fiserv into a data lake? But it had no real bearing other than saying it was technically feasible. to move data, not actually the problem that was germane to what was being solved, right? Is there a process within core? And Kalyani, since you do this quite a bit, I'm curious, are you running into is there a best practice either of you would suggest around how do you actually do a proof of concept that is meaningful, yet short of actually going and implementing the whole thing?
I don't know that it is. I don't know that it works in every situation, right?
Okay.
I mean, the situation you just described, I have actually been on a discussion with lately, and I'm not sure how else, aside from implementing the whole thing, you're going to get there, right? This use case is perfect to really have that done, but I'm not sure it works every time. And so then you have to be really go back to your framework and your diligence, and then that's when it really comes into play. So there are times it can really be delivered well, but it may not work every
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to it's a unique product on the Kobalt side, which is that we don't need to integrate with the core. We don't need to integrate with a bunch of different things, and our implementation is actually relatively lightweight. And so then it's actually pretty easy to say, okay, the problem we're solving for you is the efficiency and robustness and quality of, these partner reviews. So let's just take a sample diligence packet and emulate the exact process. And our proof of concept was less than a day. So we don't need weeks and weeks and weeks of testing. He said, let's take this process and let's get you to the results like within an hour and then give you the results. And then it can actually be as simple as that. But I think that's because we don't need to integrate with anything.
Yeah, you're unique in that regard, but I think your process is unique and I think can be extended to a lot of others where they get part of this wrong, where the proof of concept is very much like you had said, part of the close process, and you go from proof of concept to the next step is send the contract. If you look at Kalyani from your perspective, and Lindsay, interested in how it felt from the bank, you've done the proof of concept. What happens next to move you forward in the decision-making journey? Kalyani, why don't we start with you? Like when you finish the proof of concept, what's your internal next step of after proof of concept, we do what?
Yeah. Well, so the nice thing is the proof of concept, like the core team did a really good job of making sure the proof of concept was going to be valuable for them. So it kind of takes like two to tango here. They had real data that they put into Kobalt, and they actually, the outputs of Kobalt were relevant to the outputs that they need to produce as part of now their full deployment. And so we, after we did the test, we exported all of the results, all of the materials from the proof of concept, and kind of packaged that up and gave it to their team and said, now you can take your time to compare this against your manual reviews or do whatever you need to dig into this and verify the quality of the results. And then after that was when we were able to sync up and say, okay, let's align on like what would the business case be here. And then that's when we talk about timeline. What is the right timeline? That's when we learned that towards the end of 2025 was going to be the right time to pull the trigger for X, Y, and Z reason. And so we kind of had this like charted out a little bit, which also made it possible for, we didn't have to hound them. They did a good job of being clear with us and not having us waste our time either. They said, we know we want this. We're going to need it, not now, but at this time. And so let's just make it happen then.
Lindsay, did you at Core have a clear process for when the POC was done? What would happen next? Did you run things in parallel? Like what happened now that you had some results in hand?
Yeah, so that was one example. The other advantage we had after that was we were doing a lot of this document review against spreadsheets like we love in community banking. But it allows us to say, okay, well, we know when this is going to come, we're going to already have these requirements built. So that also makes for a lot more effective launch because we were essentially building all of the requirements that we knew at implementation were going to be just put into the software.
Yeah.
So we're coming in then with a much better team prepared to implement, right? Like half the time, the execution implementation is where banks struggle. And it's often because not clear requirements, not clear expectations and timelines, like scope creep. And we had all of that mapped out because we understood after the proof.
Grounded in reality, right? Like it was not projections. It was like, we have an experience here.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to put it together.
Yeah. So then when it came time to deploy on our end, they, as part of implementing Kobalt is your chance to really configure all of your risk assessments, et cetera. And they were like, it's all ready. Let's just upload it into the platform and get started. So it was one of the fastest implementations that we've also ever done.
Well, that also says a lot. And Lindsay, I'll push back. I'd say implementation is often where you feel some of the most pain, but I would say most of the failures actually happen post implementation, where we don't actually, like, we implement it. And how many times you've been in these meetings in Alloy Labs where you hear someone complain about a vendor and they're like, we're just not seeing the ROI. And the question is always raised is like, oh, what are you doing differently with it? What are you doing to support it? And they seem to think the implementation is the end of the journey, not the midpoint. Did you have the plan? Go.
Yes, no, you don't have to push hard on that. I agree. We always talk about, did we walk the last mile? Because that's where it seems to kind of stop, right? Like we got it to good and then we left it. So, I mean, for us, we've learned, right? You always have to have a postmortem because everybody's done this, but we obviously have learned from our mistakes, and we use pods, right? The product-oriented delivery teams. And we know we can only have so many going at once. And we take each phase, and that way we know that we pull it over the last mile. So I think we've really turned a corner in some of those challenges that we faced in the past. But yeah, I agree. It's once things are actually operationalizing that sometimes there's a miss. And I think that choosing the right partner for how you implement things. So do you want an out of the box that's really easy because you don't necessarily have the internal capacity to carry more of this project and design? Or do you like more customizability? You might be working with our earlier stage fintechs that don't have the organization to project manage as well. So you really have to understand roles and responsibilities too. Because often banks blame the fintech when in fact they weren't having the right expectations of the whole process.
I mean, it's interesting you say that the chief product officer of Mantle, when they were building their product for community-sized banks, would say they want something that works out of the box, off the shelf, as they say, but perfectly mimics their existing processes, which is unique to every bank, despite, what the best practice is. So I think being clear on the fact that you, as you said, you either want to do the work to have something that is perfectly customized to do it exactly the way you want it to work, which is a very different thing than it works off the shelf and does what it claims it's going to do. But that might not be the way you do it at your bank today. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, I would agree.
So, Lindsay, I'm curious if banks. Core seems to be doing a really good job at making good decisions. And you said some of the things that Core does around that alignment, around focusing, not getting too specific, but focusing on the problem to be solved, having the right decision makers there, where the proof of concept fit is. If you said a bank wants to make better decisions, what do they need to stop doing?
Yeah. And I feel a little bit guilty if I don't say this isn't something that we've always been really good at. I think if people from Core Bank are listening, they'll say, all right, we still got some room for improvement, right? So as much as I want to just hold up that trophy. But yeah, I think a lot of it is leadership alignment, which starts with a clear purpose. The thing I always say in meetings is if we're going to purchase this, who are we buying this for, right? Just because it worked, everybody likes to come to the meeting and go, oh my gosh, I just saw 6 banks and this was the greatest thing that they ever did. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you, right? So you really need to understand, who are you? What is your purpose? And who are you buying and building this for? So stop shiny ball, which is hard to do, right? That shiny ball syndrome. Stop analyzing it to death. I think sometimes we like to poke holes until there's nothing left. And the decision, the data, the ROI, it's important, but it can be 60, 70% right. And then just go, because you'll find any reason to say no, because it's sometimes easier. If you say no, there's not the accountability. And I think one of the things we also moved away from is, folks that want to be consulted but not held accountable. That's also not something that we practice anymore.
Oh, that racy thing we talk about all the time in Alloy Labs, right? Everyone wants to be consulted. No one wants to be accountable.
Yeah. So I think it's just getting out of some of those bad habits and breaking those. and then just aligning on where you're headed. I mean, we even at the beginning or the end of last year for this year, we drew our tech stack priorities, and it went to our board, it went to the leadership team, so that if anybody tries to throw a crazy wrench in that, I want to bring this new thing. Nope, we've already aligned on this. It fits our business plan. It fits our growth strategy. That can go on the back burner. So there's just not a lot of surprises now when we make decisions.
One other thing you had said that I think is worth highlighting is you keep asking questions and expecting to get answers when it isn't answerable. I did a bad job paraphrasing it, but that comment you had made really resonated with me is like, yeah, you can ask all of those things. It doesn't necessarily get you a better decision. I thought was worth highlighting. Kalyani, from your perspective, right, like the scrappy entrepreneurial sales process, what do you think that startups need to drop? Like they're holding a poor assumption, or there's something in kind of industry lore that is just wrong, that if they actually want to smooth out the sales process, what do they need to do differently than what convention would say?
I think it can be really easy to feel, especially when you're selling into this industry, which is, it requires a little bit of like patience and like understanding of timing and human behavior and incentives and things like that. But I think there's maybe a obvious tendency to say, okay, it works. Like, why can't you just buy it now? Like, what's the holdup? And then you kind of have to stop and say, there's so much going on, right? There's timing, like whose budget is it? Did we involve the person whose decision it really is? What does that person care about? And is there a priority this year that they have that like we fit in with? We need to directly talk to that person, understand it. And so I think it just, it's not unique to, sales or startups, but I think it's just, of course, I'm a very urgent person. Like I want our company to grow as quickly as possible. And I am an impatient person, but you have to balance that against just understanding the impatience is not actually going to make things happen faster.
Well, in fact, it may work against you, right?
The number, and it's annoying and spammy, and nobody wants to feel sold to. So I wasn't DMing them every day saying, when are you going to buy my product? It was like, hey, I think this can be helpful. Let's figure out together like what partnership looks like. So I think it's like a combination of not being annoying and then also just actually understanding that it's just people who are trying to solve problems. Like it's not rocket science.
The annoying factor is real. I mean, too. I think it's interesting sometimes that, Kalyani, I like how you talked about understanding the bank's true problem. I won't get too specific, but there was a situation I encountered. I was trying to help a fintech that really wanted to go sell to banks. And I said, what you're building is really cool and they're going to like it. But if you think about their laundry list of problems and what they're tackling, this is going to be nowhere near the top 20. Right. And so then if you're just going to badger them at that point and you didn't recognize that this really isn't something that bubbles to the top, it's be a tough sell.
Yeah.
Well, as we bring this home, I'll share something an Alloy Labs member shared with me around partnership that I thought was really telling, that I think you both just spoke to. Said it's a little bit like dating. If they're annoying you while you're dating in the courtship phase, how do you think you're going to feel after 20 years of marriage? And I think what you both just described is understanding what each other needs in the process is absolutely critical to that. So thank you both for coming and sharing the story of how the Core and Kobalt partnership came to be and how we can do better at making our decisions.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having us.
That's it for another week of the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. This episode was produced by our US-based production team, including producer Elizabeth Severance, audio engineer Kevin Hersham. If you like this episode, don't forget to tweet it out or post it on your favorite social media, or leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever it is that you listen to our show. Those actions help other people find our podcast, and in return, that helps us build an audience that can be supported by sponsorship so we can continue to provide you with our award-winning content every week. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you on Breaking Banks next week.